So, Bob, I thought we would read some patron emails, and we would also read some news, Google News psychology things, particularly around like the New Year resolution kind of thing. We're in that zone of the year. And we would have our usual back and forth, and hopefully the listeners consider it a useful use of their time. What do you say?
Well, the jokes are coming in too fast. Like, maybe they need a hobby.
Speaking of, this is the Psychology in Seattle Hobby Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
I am Bob. I'm a therapist in practice here in Seattle. You're a friend from graduate school. Known each other this is our 25th year.
Year 25. So here is a article.
That's our silver anniversary, Kirk.
Ooh.
What are you going to get me?
What are you going to get me? So here's a article on Refinery 29, how to actually be happier in 2020.
Okay.
By Molly Longman, how to actually be happier. So let's go through the list here.
All right.
Number 1, build strong relationships.
Huh.
So this person, all you need is one solid relationship to experience the mental perks.
Huh.
Even if you've got a group of besties you love, the effects are so powerful that it's worth putting in some time to strengthen those bonds. What do you think about that, Bob?
Well, yeah, I'd say that, yes.
Yeah.
It's a little like saying, if you want to stay alive, you ought to breathe air.
Right. It's a little obvious.
Yeah.
Number 2, do things that help you grow. So let's see. Build on your passions or take steps to strengthen your weak spots. Start a blog, take a photography class, download a language app, hire a financial coach. Those sound like terrible things, honestly. But each to their own. Research shows that people who have a sense of purpose in their lives tend to be more fulfilled and reportedly healthier. What do you think about that, Bob?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. And again, it might sound sort of obvious, but it is something that I've actually had to drill down on with a number of clients, even recently, that this notion of, do you have a purpose for living? So much of our lives are spent surviving and preparing for the next step. And I remember realizing that early in life. I was a very pretentious young man. And at the age of 16 or so, me and Lita Katibi, you know Lita, she was the original co-host on this podcast 11 years ago. And we grew up together, and we would stay up late at night and talk about these sorts of things. And,
yeah, cool.
And one of the things that I remember realizing was that everyone, including myself, was in a constant state of preparation for the next phase. Whether it was, I was young enough to remember being in grade school and preparing for middle school, and being in middle school and preparing for high school, and then at the time we were in high school preparing for college, and I thought, okay, and a lot of effort. Middle class people, there's just a lot of effort spent on those kinds of markers. Playing sports was another big one. Was like, football was my main sport, so every sport that I played in addition to that was in preparation for the next football season. So I wrestled because even though that wasn't my favorite sport, it was a helpful preparation for football because it kept me active. It was good balance. It was good body work.
Yeah.
It was good teamwork and leadership skills. And
I didn't know you wrestled.
Yeah, arguably that was my best sport.
No shit.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was, at a certain point in my league, I was very dominant.
No kidding.
Yeah. To the point where it was kind of a joke. I even wrestled up I was like just below heavyweight, and so I wrestled up heavyweight. And for a long time, I had a record for the fastest pin. It was 2 seconds, which doesn't make any sense because you generally need about 3 seconds to pin someone. But you can pin someone so definitively that sometimes the ref will just call it because it's just so definitive. And so this is just me bragging, but
this is a fun story.
So this heavyweights often, because they could be whatever weight they wanted to be.
Yeah.
And they also didn't have to have a lot of skill because they were so big, you know, and strong and massive. And so it was hard to move them.
Right.
And so, and I was close to that, you know, I was pretty big for my age and at the time. And so I was like, okay, I know this guy sucks, and I'm going to try to pin him as fast. I was like trying to chase records at that point because I had the most pins. I had, you know, it was just to challenge myself. And so I surprised so I was like, I got to get him on his back as soon as I can. And I was a football player, so I just used kind of a football tackle and just tackled him. And he was so bad or unaware or something that he just was limp, and I tackled him. I just tackled him head to head, and he fell backwards with his legs going up in the air. And his shoulder blades both slammed into the mat. I landed on top of him, and the ref, you know, slammed his hand into the mat. And I think the timekeeper was a little late. So when they looked at the time, it was a 2-second match.
Fun.
But wrestling was so stressful because it was so one-on-one under a literal spotlight.
Yeah.
And the crowd, and you don't have any clothes on. You're wearing underwear for the most part. You know, you're basically wearing like a bikini without like with your nipples showing, you know, it's a bikini with your nipples showing. And it's so terrifying. And when you lose, it's so it can really be scary. Like you can actually have your breathing cut off.
Right.
And winning wasn't very satisfying to me. Like when I won, I felt more relief. And when I lost, I felt just horrible. Yeah. Whereas in football, we usually lost, but I never felt terrible about the losses. It was a team. Yeah. You know, there's like 40 guys. Yeah. And we're all in this together. Right. And
two sides on the ball, and
and you know, it just didn't work out. The other team just had a really good running back, or our quarterback, everyone knows, is not amazing, but he did the best he could. And I was best friends with all these guys too. Wrestling team, it was like I was still good friends with some of the wrestling guys, but it just felt more disjointed. But yeah, I often say on the podcast, as a way of sort of culturalizing me, I was captain of the football team in high school. I was also captain of the wrestling team.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
We're learning about you today.
Yeah. But I don't like to talk about it, or no, it's not the way to say it. I don't often talk about it because it actually makes my palms sweat. My palms are sweating just thinking about wrestling.
The stress of it.
Yeah, it was very stressful. While I'm on this topic, I would have a match, and right afterwards I would have the best night of sleep. Oh. And then the next day, as soon as I woke up, this invasive thought would be like, you have another match in 4 days. Right. Or 7 days or something. Right. And then that anxiety would just every moment that my brain could let that invasive thought in. Right. That's what my brain was thinking about. Right. And then the match would happen, right, and I'd relax and sleep well, and then I'd have another 6 days of just awful anxiety. Yeah. But when it came to football, I never worried at all.
Yeah, nice.
The coach would be yelling at me, and I'd be like, yeah, and then I'd be like, well, I don't know, let's see. But with wrestling, it was so internal and exposing,
solitary.
Yeah. And so when I got to upper ages of wrestling, I quit and I switched to basketball.
Oh, really?
Which I'd played before wrestling, and I was not a good basketball player, but I was tall, so I could play defense. Yeah. And that was a lot more fun because again, it was a lot of the football guys played basketball. Sure. But anyway, back to the other topic was that we spend so much time doing things to prepare for the next step. And, for some people, they're legitimately surviving, like they're in an abusive relationship or they have a physical illness of some sort. And so it's hard.
Or they're just trying to get enough money to make ends meet.
Trying to get enough money to make ends meet. It's hard to have the luxury of having a purpose and a higher, self-actualized experience. And so, so there's that. But I think even within that, there's some ability to have purpose. I mean, there are people who live in certain societies around the world who are struggling, and yet if you ask them, they would talk as a way, in the way that they would talk, they would reveal they have a purpose in their life that makes them feel like it's all worth it or something.
Yeah, purpose and meaning.
Do you think about this very much?
Oh, yeah.
What do you think about?
Oh, well, I think lots of different things. Let's see, what am I thinking right this second?
About purpose in life and meaning. And do you work with your clients? Do you think about it personally?
Yeah, I do think about it. I think about purpose and meaning. Sometimes it feels futile. Since I became an atheist, my sense of purpose has shifted a lot. Like, come the end of all this learning, what's going to happen is I'm going to be dust, and sometimes I feel sad about that because, becoming a therapist is probably the most rewarding and also the hardest thing I ever did. And I've spent 30 years gathering experience and becoming. And what I notice is, I can look back on the last 10 years at any point along the way and say, oh yeah, better than I was then, right? Mm-hmm. And I think actually in the last 4 years, I thought, oh, you're starting to really understand your job, right? It's taken that long, 20, 25, 26 years to really understand what my job is.
Yeah.
And so I'm 52 now. I'll probably work somewhere between 15 and the rest of my life, 15 years and the rest of my life. I don't know if I'm retiring or not. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting thing. It's not like bricklaying.
Right. And that is the American, or at least the old ideal, was to retire.
Right.
But when I think about that, I think, but I want to do the podcast. Mm-hmm. I like doing the pod. One of my favorite hobbies is doing the podcast. Right. So I don't want to stop doing that.
Right.
I don't like just traveling and staring at the ocean. Like that
wouldn't do it for you.
I hate stuff like that. I mean, I don't mind doing it for 36 seconds, but beyond that, like I want to be doing something.
Back to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's like I have spent a life gathering and honing a skill.
Preparing.
Like
always trying to be a better therapist.
Yeah, always. And it's kind of nice because the doing of it, at least for me, has had that outcome. I think if you're burned out, that you could do and do and do and not get better.
Yeah.
But, let's say I work till I'm 82. Then I'm dead.
Yeah.
And all that meaning and all that purpose is gone.
Right.
And that makes me sad.
Yeah.
Not because I think I'm great, but I just don't like the idea of something dissolving like that into nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think about purpose that way, and it fills me with dread.
Yeah.
And at the same time, one of the things I know about purpose, just based on the little bit of research I've done on it, is actually the biggest contributor to a person's sense of happiness is having a sense of purpose and meaning, more so than doing something pleasant like staring at the ocean, right? That has a very short-lived impact. It usually gets over when you're done looking at the ocean, or you're done having your slice of pizza, or you're done having your beer or whatever. When the football game's over, you've had this pleasant event, and that's great. And then when it's over, its impact on you fades, right? And then so that has some impact. The second thing that has impact on happiness, at least as I understand it, the little bit of reading I've done, is becoming in the flow, which I think is what you're talking about when you're writing music. When you're doing the podcast, you're not thinking about everything else, and time just passes without awareness. That's what a flow state is. So that gives a greater sense of happiness than just doing a pleasant event, right? And then the third thing that creates the most lasting, this is according to Martin Seligman, the happiness guy, the positive psychology guy, is sense of meaning and purpose. That's the greatest contributor and the most lasting impact. So good to know.
Yeah, that's great. So what is your purpose?
My purpose is to create a space for my wife. That's probably my greatest purpose. I love being a therapist, and I think the work that I do is really important. But I think my work life is in service of my marriage. And really, my service of my marriage is my devotion to making Colleen have a better life.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that feels congruent with your soul, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. I think if I can help her have a better life, I will have done something worthwhile.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's like you want to make the world a better place, but you want to focus that on Colleen.
On Colleen.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and you can get into the psychology of that and where does that come from in my own attachment wounds, and it's all real. And at the same time, though, this is what gives me a sense of meaning and purpose, is contributing to her welfare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so people might, because it's not a typical thing that we hold up as like the American ideal of a purpose, right?
No, it's not.
And it sounds dependent, so to speak.
Yeah, it is.
But the what's the difference between that and saying, for like mine is, I want to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
Well, that's dependent on other people's opinion of my work or something. And why can't I find inner peace without getting some feedback from others that I'm trying or that I'm actually succeeding or something? You know, it's a...
Oh, well, that makes sense, though. I think the human creature needs feedback to know if we're on the right track.
And the human creature needs...
And reinforcement.
We need relationships and closeness. And so what better way to be in line with our nature than to dedicate ourselves to our family?
Yeah, well, this part of my family anyways.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, if one said, my kids, you know, I'm gonna make this world a better place for my kids.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people do. Mm-hmm. My brother, I think my brother, that's how he lives. I've known him, of course, for his whole life, and I've never seen him beam so much as when he talks about the kids. His kids we've had kids for 23 years now, so long time to be a dad, half his life. And I'm pretty sure that is his purpose. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
do you think about that very often? That purpose that you have? Like, is it just something that pops in your head every now and then, or are you thinking about that on a daily basis?
That's a really good question. I don't really know the answer. It's sort of like, I don't know that I consciously think about it, but it's always with me. It's always with me.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And it makes all the ups and downs worth it, right? Like a purpose has a lot of purposes, and one of the purposes of a purpose is that it makes all the ups and downs worth it.
Yes.
Like, well, but I couldn't enact this purpose without taking the bad with the good.
Yeah,
and so
I agree.
It's worth it to me. It's like your purpose in life, or you really like to go hiking or something, but you don't like being rained on.
Yeah.
But you're like, well, but my purpose in life is hiking, and so sometimes you're going to get rained on.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it's going to be.
Right.
So it's worth it to me to take that risk of being rained on.
It changes the nature of my attitude towards the rain then, right? It's like, oh, this is in service of something greater, and this is just part of what comes with that, and I accept that. Right. As opposed to, oh crap, now I'm wet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hate this. Why am I here?
Yeah. Yeah. Even though I'm known to kvetch.
There's nothing wrong with kvetching. But at
yeah,
the end,
I agree with what you're saying about the purpose makes the bad stuff, it mellows it, or it gives a sense of humor, or it gives it a sense of romance, or nostalgia, chewing the dirt, as they say. And I think without the purpose, the stresses in my life would be nuts.
Right.
Yeah. Like to go through them, it would be nuts.
Right. To not have some cohesive reason for it all. But, you were saying earlier that when you die or when you retire and you look back on your life and you think, well, I'll be dead soon and it'll all be for naught. Like, how does that interface with this purpose in your life?
I have a sense of the finiteness of time. Yeah. And I just have I'm 52. Since about age 38, I've had this fear of death, just this kind of sense of dread that, like the other night I was just going to sleep and I was thinking, at some point, there won't be a day in which I'm going to sleep anymore. There'll be nothing. There'll be this lifeless body. Yeah. In some form or other, probably ash, but. Right. Yeah. But,
you're saying earlier that it bums you out that
it does.
You'll be dead. You'll be eliminated. You won't matter at a certain point.
Right.
And and your preparations to be a good therapist will have been kind of lost to the wind. And
that's right. That's nicely put.
But how does that is that the same? Does that apply the same to your purpose with Colleen? Like that will be lost to the wind too?
Yeah, that's a great question. Never thought about it before, but no, it does not. It doesn't.
It's higher than that.
Yeah,
transcends death and time.
Yeah, it does. It does. I don't have that kind of dread. I do have a deal with her. I will outlive her.
You have a deal?
Yeah, we made the deal.
What's the deal?
The deal is I will outlive her.
You will outlive her?
Yes.
So she wants you to outlive her?
I think she's afraid of me being alone, but
what's this deal? Like,
it's not real. It's not like I have control over
but
this.
you've talked about it.
Oh yeah, many times.
So I don't understand. What's the deal? What deal did you make?
I said to her, I'm going to outlive you so that you don't have to suffer through my death.
Oh.
Because she's had a great deal of loss. And she doesn't need that.
I see.
So I'm going to survive her so that she doesn't have to survive me.
One final purpose.
Yes.
And then
you'll
fade away.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. How often do you think about your death?
Oh, regularly.
Like, I think about it every day, multiple times a day.
Yeah.
I've talked about this in the podcast before. And for some of you, a minority of you, you'll be like, oh my God, that's me too. To another group of you, you'll be like, huh, that's weird. To another group of you, you'll be like, and you'll be scared for me. And you'll be concerned for me, which I thank you for. And
I wonder which one I'm going to be. Say more.
What do you mean, to me?
Yeah. Well, when I think about you as you're talking about death here, I wonder if I'm going to be the first one, the second one, or the third one.
Yeah. And I don't know how I am to it, honestly. Because there's a part of me that's like, and the way I experience it is very similar to the way you described it. It's usually at night.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have theories as to why it's at night. My main theory is that as we... nighttime is usually more solitary, and we don't have things to do. Like right now, I'm podcasting. You know, the morning you got to get going. There's stuff you got to get done.
Right.
And so you're not just sitting there, you know, with your thoughts. Another speculation is that as our brain starts to transition to sleep time, certain functions start to become less active. And one of the functions that becomes less active has something to do with suppressing those kinds of intrusive thoughts, or has to do with putting those in perspective or something. Because we've probably for many eons as a species had to wrestle somehow with this notion of death. I imagine that as a species we've had the intelligence to understand death and predict it a long time ago. Yeah. And so it would make sense that we would evolve some kind of mechanism in the brain to not focus on that too much, because it would cause too much despair. Let alone just the despair of knowing that your kids will die, or and that your parent and your loved, you know, everyone's going to be dead. You know? And so forget about self-preservation. It's just the predicted grief. Yeah. It just, you know, when you really think about it, it's just, and so it pops into my head, and it's not pleasant. You know, it's not a welcomed thought. And I wish that I could be ignorant of it, or I wish my brain could suppress it more often. But on the other hand, I think that it is a benefit, because I started thinking about it, at least in intellectual ways, since I was a teenager, or maybe even younger. There wasn't really anything. No, I, in my life, on average, have had one of the lowest loss lives one has ever had. Death in my family is almost non-existent.
Longevity?
Yeah. I mean, everyone that I grew up with is, for the most part, still alive, you know, close friends. And my grandma lived to be 101, you know.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
amazing.
That kind of thing, you
Mom's
know.
or dad's side?
My Japanese grandma, yeah. And my white grandparents were 90 or 91 when they died.
Yeah, you're going to be a while.
Well, we'll see. Anyway, and I've never moved out of Seattle, so I didn't have to. I've never lost my friends. I still hang out with people like you that I've been friends with for decades.
Right.
And I've had the same job at Antioch essentially for. I just, this is just a dumb little thing, but I started teaching, this week, and
I was going to ask you about that.
And what were you going to ask?
Are you teaching this week?
Yeah, family of origin, case consultation, and I thought that this will be the 4th decade in which I will have taught. Because I taught in the 90s, the zeros, the teens, and now the 20s. And although it's been 23 years, it somehow spans 4 different decades.
Right. You and Vince Carter.
And it's just sort of a funny little thought. 4 decades.
4 decades.
Yeah. Anyway.
I know you have not at Antioch since you were 24.
Yeah. I took some breaks, but basically, right. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I'm Mr. Antioch.
You are.
I mean, it's a weird thing, So anyway.
So you said, I haven't had a whole lot of loss. So thinking about death in this way is a little bit surprising or unusual or something. But
right.
Did you want to say more about
Thanks for getting me back on track.
Yeah, you bet.
So it pops into my head, and I'm not sure why. I think part of it in my research has to do with my slight avoidant attachment. It is actually kind of an insecure attachment thing. When we're very securely attached, we generally don't have anxiety anyway. And if we do have anxiety, it doesn't intensify. To die is the ultimate separation.
Oh, yeah.
To die is the ultimate lack of attachment security. You're being separated from not only those you love, but you're being separated from the world. You're being separated from yourself.
Yes.
And it is a convenient paranoia, if you will, that sort of grafts onto that general feeling of terror of being alone, essentially.
That's an oxymoron. Convenient paranoia.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
And so that's another speculation I have about it. But it doesn't really get me down. I tend not to get depressed.
So at night when you're falling asleep, what do you feel when you think about it?
It just sort of pops into my head as part of curiosity. And another part of it morphs into okay, well, if you're going to die, what did you do with your life today in light of that? And so that's sort of the benefit of thinking about it.
Oh, that's cool.
And I've always thought that way. And I think that has been a strength of mine, honestly. I'm not afraid to brag about that. I have not suffered stupidity in my life. If I don't like someone, I don't want to see them.
Yeah.
If something is bad for me, a job, for example, then I'm fucking quitting. I am the first person to be like, as soon as I don't like something, I'm out of there.
Yeah.
And to build my career, I don't want to be dependent on, for example, my university for my livelihood, for my professional satisfaction. And so I started this podcast and made it lucrative, and it took me 11 years, but I've arrived, and now I'm not dependent on the university anymore.
No, you're dependent on patrons.
Right. So
shit.
Please don't ever leave me, people. It's just that I think that if I didn't think about death as often as I have, I would maybe get a little relaxed about things and say, I'll deal with, there'll be an ideal life at some point in the future. I'm focusing on this right now. I can deal with this, whereas often if you think about it every day, it's like, if I'm going to be dead one day, I do not want to, I'm not going to waste my precious time on X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
And so it is, I think it's a benefit. And I don't know which outweighs the other, because it's also not pleasant to every day you know, really in the gut. It's just not an intellectual thought that runs through my head. You know, it's a full body experience. Like, I'm going to be rotting in the ground. I'll be dust. And I don't know if there is an afterlife. I really hope there is. There could be some version. I have various different possibilities in my mind of what that could look like. Sure. You know, it's not inconceivable. It's quite conceivable that humans have invented such a thing to deal with the anxiety.
Sure.
But it's also quite conceivable that, you know, who the fuck knows. So I mean, even things that are within the realm of science, like an alien race that's benevolent just decides to snatch all of our essences, you know, as we die and put us somewhere else. You know, that there's a lot of different possibilities. And
you can get saved on a hard drive somewhere.
Yeah, I don't care.
But you're saying, so you're saying that while it's also a springboard towards living a productive, wakeful life, you're saying that you feel scared?
Yeah. So which camp are you in? Well, I'm like you. I'm disappointed. It's depressing. I'm not depressed, but it's a depressing thought at the moment of like, well, goddamn, like fucking A. Like, this is the way the universe works. Like, you try and you build and you achieve and you share, and then you just die.
Yeah.
And then 100 years later, no one remembers you.
Yeah.
And, or even a year later, you know?
Yeah.
And
even being remembered that's poor consolation.
Yeah, really poor. Because I'm not around.
Yeah.
I'd rather be never remembered and live forever. That's sort of a weird thing, but
anonymous.
I'd rather be anonymous and live forever than you know, live the short life that I think we're given on this planet. And as I'm similar age to you, and you know, it's quite likely we're on the other side of the halfway point.
Oh, without a doubt for me.
Yeah, and it's a very strange thing to think about. Yeah. So, which category are you in reaction to my?
Oh, it scares the hell out of me.
Yeah.
The last breath, the last meal, the last time I make love with Colleen, the last time I see her face, the last time I know something familiar, the last time anything. I hope it's not in a smelly hospital.
Do you think about that?
Sometimes.
Like,
but
where
that's not what
it'll be?
scares me. Yeah, that's not really what scares me, though. I mean, I don't like that because you ever been to one of these places? It's like kind of depressing.
Like hospice?
Yeah, hospice or hospitals or nursing homes or whatever. They're kind of depressing. No, for me, it's just like this body will stop. This body will stop breathing. It'll stop seeing. It'll stop experiencing. It'll just stop.
Yeah.
And that scares me.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you're talking, I keep thinking about the last scene in Blade Runner, you know, with Rutger Hauer's on the roof.
Yeah.
He's got the pigeon. Yeah.
Tears in the rain.
Tears in the rain. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. A human constructed machine realizes its mortality and has a beautiful philosophical moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And instead of killing the hunter, he lets him live.
Yeah.
Not to spoil the movie, but
oh well. Hopefully folks have seen it. Yeah. Worth a look, guys, if you haven't.
Yeah.
But when you were talking, I was also thinking about Thoreau. You know, that Thoreau, he's like, I went to the woods because I wanted to live deliberately. And I'm going to paraphrase here, but to suck out all the marrow of life. And not when I died, discovered that I had not lived. That's you.
It is. And I read Thoreau in high school.
Oh, did you?
And I think it had an influence, or it, you know, likely did. Emerson.
You're a pretty thoughtful guy, so it wouldn't be any great shock to me that you started early.
Yeah. And
earlier than maybe the average bear.
Well, I don't know what adjective to put to me. Thoughtful is one word. Another one is just one of those people that think about their death. I mean, I have found kinship with others, and it's a wide variety of sorts of people. And again, there's a 5% of you out there that will be like, oh my God, that's me.
Yeah.
You know, and I've actually communicated with some of you that, you think about your death a lot, and it's fraught with all sorts of difficulty and disappointment and anxiety, I suppose. But I will say that it doesn't scare me. I don't know if it's ever scared me. And I once, was talking about this with someone, and they're just like, oh, you have death anxiety. And I was like, well, I guess so, but it's not really anxiety. It's awareness of fucking reality in my mind. It's not irrational to predict that I will be dead. I don't know how helpful it is for me to be invasively thinking about it so often. I kind of wish I could turn it down, but I wouldn't want to ever not think about it. I'd want to, and I see other people around me who, when they're faced with these kinds of questions, or I raise them, because it just 1% of the time I sort of voice an aspect of what I'm talking about. Like I might tell my wife, I just realized that I'm very likely on the other side of the midpoint of my life or something. And what I notice is people tend to not really want to participate in those kinds of conversations. They'll call it morbid, or they'll say, well, you never know, technology could make us live forever. Some kind of thing like that. Or they're religious and they're like, well, there's better in the afterlife.
I think people that are religious are lucky. Yeah. I think atheists get a bad rap. And maybe that's true of some atheists, that they look down on theists. I don't look down on theists at all. I actually have a great deal of admiration and envy of folks who have a belief in something beyond this existence. It is a great source of comfort. And when I used to be a theist, it was a great source of comfort. And, oh baby, I read that book, Cosmos. That was a bad day.
Carl Sagan.
Yeah.
Really? That's how...
That was the moment for me. I was in South Carolina, and I happened to read a copy of that book, Cosmos. And
how old were you?
38.
And it just snapped, like all of a sudden? Like prior to that?
Prior to that, I would have said I was a theist.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like agnostic?
Like just not a member of a religion.
Interesting. But a believer in God and afterlife.
Yeah.
And then you read that book, and
I did.
Just gone.
Yep.
Just over.
Yep.
Did you tell anyone?
Yeah, I told Colleen. She was really upset.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because she's a theist.
Yes.
Oh.
And we had just gotten engaged, like literally days before. We had just gotten engaged, and now she's like, oh shit, I'm hitching my wagon to some atheist dude here. I don't know what this means for me. And then I think for a long time it was hard for her, because she believed that I looked down on her for her belief. And I have said to her with tears in my eyes many times, baby, I hope you're right.
Yeah. It's not a matter of looking down.
No, but atheists do get that reputation as looking down on theists.
Well, and it's deserved.
Some of them do. Yeah. Not this one.
I know atheists who are absolutely condescending and mean. One
of my favorite things in work is when my clients tell me about their spirituality. I love that. It's so fascinating, interesting, and not like you go to the zoo and you look at the lab animals, but like, wow, to really engage with somebody on this level is really cool. Yeah. And then I will often, if I think it's helpful, I'll reference their spiritual beliefs as they struggle with the difficulties in their lives. Like folks that are members of the LDS Church, what everybody calls Mormons, right? One of the things I love about Mormons is that there is no one prophet. Anybody can hear God. I love that. I love that. That's so cool. Because, I grew up Catholic, and who hears God, right? It's the fucking Pope, right? And that's it. And everybody else, we're just subject to whatever the whims of the hierarchy are, right? Which I think is just completely bogus. And actually, it's one of the things I admire most about my mom is she had a spiritual crisis when she was, actually right after I was born. Did I ever tell you this?
I don't think so.
Oh, yeah. My parents, both of them, had very little support, no support from their families, got married in their young 20s and started having kids the way Catholics did back in the 60s. So by the time my dad was 30 and my mother was 29, they had 3 kids. And my mom didn't want to have any more kids. She goes to the priest and she's...
you did tell me
I did tell you about this because her Catholicism was really important to her. Yeah. So she goes to the priest because that's what you do. You look there for guidance, and the priest says to her, well, contraception is immoral and a sin, and your duty as a wife is to have sex with your husband when he wants it.
I really just don't get that.
I don't get it either, baby.
It's not in the Bible. There's nothing that Jesus said that said you can't use family planning. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was an invention by post-Jesus institutions.
Yeah.
And I sort of get it on a level. So the only speculations I have, and I'm sure other people have, written books about such things, but so this isn't anything new, and maybe I'm even getting it from there, is the obvious one is sexism, and that women don't have any control over their bodies.
It's about power.
But don't men want a family plan as well? I mean, isn't that the whole joke, is like men don't want more kids? That was the classic 50s cartoon was,
right.
It's twins, and then the man faints.
Right.
Because the man's like, crap, now I got to take care of two kids.
Two more. Yeah.
So why... So the institution is, it's not just screwing over the women, which it clearly is, but it's also screwing over the man. What if the man was like, I'd like to still have sex, but I think 5 kids is enough, or something. Like, I don't understand. So the sexism part kind of makes sense, but it also kind of doesn't.
It doesn't.
And then the other, aspect of culture is, you can't go against God, right?
Yeah.
It's like playing God, which I guess I understand if you really live in that world of just like, don't defy God. If God wants you to have kids, then you're having kids. So
that's kind of a weird view of sex, if you ask me.
But, it makes sense if you live in that world, taken to a certain extreme. You have Christian scientists who say, you don't even want to mess with you don't want to take a medication or have any medical treatment.
Right, that interferes with...
Again, if you go down a certain road of belief, it has logical sense to it. It looks bizarre, but in that world, it makes sense.
Right.
And then the other thing about culture is like, well, we need more Catholics. So the more the more children there are, by definition, the more people there are to pay tithings in 100 years.
I almost spit my coffee.
But
I know it's all about power, and it's all about who's in charge and how do we get more of power. It's a total hierarchy, patriarchy, really.
Yeah.
Well, so the priest said that to her. It's kind of weird that somebody who's at least subscribing to public celibacy is giving advice about marriage. Anyways, he said that to her, and she said, well, piss on this. And she went on the pill. Yeah. And scared the shit out of my father. Oh, Betsy, it's a sin. He was really scared. My dad was, they both were really, really scared and alone. They didn't have any support. They weren't going to get any from the church, and they had nothing from their families, and they didn't really have contact.
They weren't going to get help from the church?
No.
What do you mean?
Well, if my father said, hey, my wife went on the pill, the priest would have just done the exact same thing.
But couldn't they just not say?
Yeah.
Couldn't they just not say that she's on the pill? Why does anyone need to know in the church?
Because God sees all.
So you have to say?
Well, it's like, it doesn't matter whether you say or not. God sees all, so God knows it. And, it's like, you don't have privacy. Yeah. And they were really scared. And they were also really relying on their affiliation with their church as one of the meager sorts of supports that were available to them. Yeah. They're both really religious people. Yeah. I mean, I think in their later years, their view of Catholicism shifted drastically, actually. And I don't think that it actually did. But it started with that moment when she said no. And she went on the pill. And then about 2 years later, they decided they actually wanted a fourth. So that's my brother, the lawyer. And after that, she got a diaphragm. And there we go. Yeah. And my father, God bless him, he was a little slow to the game, but he joined her. And in fact, he did that most of their life, which I think actually in many ways was good, and in some ways set up this...
Did what most of his life?
Followed her.
Oh.
She'd say, well, I believe this, and he'd be like, no, 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 okay. Yeah, and I think in some ways, that was really good, and in some ways that set up this power dynamic in their marriage that probably wasn't so good. Mm-hmm. So anyways, my mom listened to herself.
Yeah, that's great.
And at a time when it would be very hard to do. I don't know what I'd do, Kirk, if she hadn't. I don't know where I'd be.
What do you mean?
Well, that was a turning point in their lives, and also a turning point in how they were going to raise their kids.
Oh, in terms of power. So your mom took power and said, I'm going to live the life I want to live, not the life that other people want me to live.
Yeah, and then it changed their involvement with the church, which of course had an impact on us because it changed the way we were involved with the church. And at some point when I was before age 10, they stopped making us go. And I didn't do all the stuff that you do when you're a Catholic. You get confirmed, and I did have a first communion, but it was at our house, and it wasn't one of these, it was by those standards casual.
You're saying that your mom, I'm basing this on other things you said to me, and sure. I'll cut this out if you don't want this to be on the air, but your mom was a better parent than your dad was.
Ah, that's interesting.
I thought that's what you were saying. It's because you're saying that your mom sort of took control, and didn't you just say that?
Yeah.
You wouldn't be who you were.
Well, I never thought about it that way, but I'm thinking about it that way now. And yeah, in this way, she was.
She has deficits, but she was better than your dad.
Yeah.
And that the power from patriarchy to at least your mom has a voice.
Yeah.
Had a huge benefit to your environment growing up.
Yeah, it did.
The overall vibe of your mom is calling the shots when it came to how to treat you as a child.
Right.
Was that what you were saying?
Yeah, it is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
And I have a vulnerability to being a rule follower. Did you ever take that Cooter occupational preference test back in high school? Do you know what it is?
Maybe.
It's this.
It's called Cooter?
Kuder, Cooter.
Do you know what? That's a word. That's a bad word from when I was growing up.
No, I thought they spelled it different.
And I'm sure they did.
But you take this test, and based on your results, they tell you what professions you're suited for.
Yeah.
My top 4 were enlisted in any branch of the military.
That's hilarious.
Because I was a rule follower.
Oh.
And I have a vulnerability to being a rule follower. I can get kind of rigid and orthodox, and I wasn't raised in the Catholic Church, which is all about the rules. Is that movie St. Vincent? He's like Chris, the Irish comedian guy, Chris something. He's in a lot of films. He plays a priest in this film, and he says to the kids, "All your religions are good, but mine's the best because it has the most rules."
Yeah, I was going to say that there's a dark side and light side to those rules. Is that because I was going to say, man, Catholicism really shoots themselves in the foot by making all these really silly rules that I'm sure there are plenty of Catholics that are just like, well, we don't have to make this a rule. We can make it a suggestion, but we don't have to make it like you're excommunicated or something.
Right. That's happening.
Because we're going to lose so many paying customers.
Oh, it's practically speaking a bad business model.
Right. But on the light side of the rules is that we, in a certain perspective, we retain our childish needs into adulthood, all of them, one of which is the need for safety and for someone to tell us what to do.
Right.
And when we are obedient and on our knees and bowing our head.
Right.
And putting our hands together and saying please and asking Lord Father or even the Father, the priest or something.
Yeah, right.
There's a sense of safety and comfort and especially if that authority has no doubt in their belief, because our parents are best when we look to our parents and they have no doubt. I have no doubt that the fact that your tooth fell out doesn't mean another tooth will grow in.
Yeah, right.
And you're just like, really? They're like, yeah. I have no doubt that you just fell down and skinned your knee. I have no doubt you'll be okay.
Right.
and you just need that power. And then there's all these rules that come down from your parents, and many of which don't make any sense. Why do I have to go to bed at 8?
Yeah.
I don't want to go to bed at 8.
Right.
Why can't I stay up till 9 and watch Fantasy Island like my older brother and sister?
But you're in a container. These folks are holding you in a container, which does help humans feel safe.
I feel wonderful. To not have rules for your child is to neglect them.
Oh yeah, that's bad.
So we grow up and we have fears, and it's a wonderful thing. And we could have the condescending atheistic perspective, just like, oh well, you're just a child and you're weak or something.
Yeah, right.
And that's silly. I mean, 98% of people on the planet are religious, and they're all weaker than you, Sir Atheist. You know what I mean?
Silliness.
You're better than all of them.
Yeah, forget it.
So it's a pro and a con.
Yeah.
So I guess it makes sense that there's going to be some rub between those rule systems and society, and I guess it's just kind of sad that many institutions can't adjust, you know, like being gay, for example, to be another example of retaining old rules that are really just harmful. To have kosher foods, I'm not that aware, but it's probably not a huge consequence to that. It's probably not harmful to any particular group of people, you know what I mean? To say for a family to be like, we only eat kosher. It is harmful to say that gay people are sinning and they're going to hell, and that blah blah blah. Right? Now I know some of you Christians out there who are of the belief that it is a sin to be gay. You wouldn't say they're going to hell. You would say that everyone sins, and we all just need to, and we can't judge other people, but there are sins, and one of the sins is being gay. Anyway, where did we get there?
Well, for me, I'm vulnerable to seeking out the safety and comfort of the rules, but what it creates in me to do so is it creates aggressive certainty. I know the right path because someone told me what it was, and I am vulnerable to that. I'm 52, but I'm still vulnerable to that. And so when I learn something, I can be kind of a shit. There's nothing worse than learning a little bit about something. It's sort of obnoxious. So I have been, and it's probably more shame than I deserve, but nonetheless, I have a great deal of shame about my moments of aggressive certainty. I hate it. It's just so, it misses the mark so much. And so one of the things I've learned from lots of people, you included, is flexibility. And I'm really grateful for that. And so nowadays, I just figure if I don't feel compassion, I'm probably missing something.
If you don't feel compassion for a cultural group like Catholics that don't make any sense to you.
Or whoever.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so I have these moments of, I don't feel compassion. I'm not saying I feel compassion. I'm saying I have moments when I don't feel it. And when I don't feel it, that's the area of growth and learning for me.
Right. And true compassion, not looking down on compassion,
oh no,
right. And that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like a comment, we're both Seattle-lites, which makes us by definition progressive liberals. And it's, I for a while I was running on the assumption, I can't remember where I heard this, that Seattle was like typical to the United States, was pretty close to 50-50 Democrats and Republicans, and that the Republicans in Seattle were just outnumbered and didn't talk very often.
Oh.
And I was in the assumption maybe like 60% Democrat, 40% Republican. It's something like, just even in King County or something, it's something like 85% Democrat or something. It's I can't remember, I don't know the stats.
Like enormously
but yeah, it's
skewed.
really skewed. Yeah. And the... anyway, so a common result of that cultural pocket that we live in, and on the internet, whatever sort of Google algorithms and Facebook algorithms feed us with.
Oh, interesting.
We, will have negative thoughts about Republicans.
Yeah.
Not only just the politicians, but also the voters. And it's really hard to have compassion for the messages and the impressions that are in my head, given to me by others.
Yeah, those are impressions, though. They're not like, you're not sitting across the table from someone who actually holds different beliefs from you.
Yeah.
You just have these impressions. It would be hard to have compassion.
Right. If I elevate myself, then I can have compassion, but it's another form of pity. It's just like, well, you're just a product of your propaganda.
That's not real compassion.
Right.
And you're saying, hey, no, that's false. That's no good.
Right.
Yeah.
To have true compassion and humility is to recognize that the other person is just as, quote unquote, right as you are.
Yeah.
The other person has just as much validity and deserves respect, and there's a good chance that I could learn something from a Republican,
right?
And there's a good chance that part of their point of view is actually a good counterbalance to my point of view.
Right.
I can't see that. It's hard for me to feel it. It's hard for me to.
Hard to imagine.
It's hard to imagine.
Well, everybody has a growth edge somewhere.
But so it's things like that, where. When like interfaith, because I didn't grow up Catholic. I grew up in a what we called non-denominational, which was kind of like hippie Christianity.
Nice.
We baptized in Lake Sammamish.
Really?
While singing these sort of 70s hymns.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually pictures, and my dad baptized me too.
Oh.
So it was very non-hierarchical. You know what I mean? And very of the community.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Very hippie, I would say. And so, when I look at the Catholic Church, I feel it looks silly to me.
Yeah.
Lutherans, by extension, kind of as well. And so there's a fair amount of Lutherans in Seattle because we're a Scandinavian sort of outpost back in the day. But if I have compassion, true compassion, I can say like, well, there's wisdom in there, and it's just another way to live, you know, and God bless them. Excuse the pun, I guess, but it's not any worse than the way I'm living, you know, and so I absolutely do respect that. And I agree with you. I have a similar sentiment that I not only love to talk with my clients about their spirituality.
Oh, really?
And their religion. Yeah.
Nice to hear.
And I propagate this to my supervisees as well, because in general, I find most therapists avoid it.
They avoid it.
Or they come at it like I actually know therapists who have the belief that religion is actually counter to mental wellness.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a colleague of mine right now who abhors when clients talk about religion and sort of inwardly rolls her eyes at it, and I just
right. And I get it in a sense, but there's such a higher purpose there, such a higher meaning. One of which is just your fucking responsibility to your clients to not judge them and to hear them and to be there for them.
It really goes a lot better when you can set that aside.
Yeah, and put aside and understand the difference. Because we, as therapists, we're in this weird position where we have to delineate between our quote-unquote unhelpful beliefs and our helpful beliefs. We all have the belief that if a client came to us and said, my husband is routinely beating me with a bat every night, we would, all of us, I would hope, have the belief that is untenable, there's really no way to have that work. Yeah. There's no excuse for it. Right. I don't care if the husband is suffering.
Yeah, right.
That has got to stop.
It has to stop.
And if the wife was like, well, men, we might internally roll our eyes and go like, oh boy, like, no. Now, the approach varies from therapist. Some therapists, if you're solution focused, for example, you might put that all aside. But internally, you're going to have the thought of like, that, It's really not going to. Now, if you're pure solution focused, by the way, you would actually completely let that go. But anyway, but we might also have the point of view that religion is a harmful thing to humans.
Yeah, I don't agree with that.
And there's a lot of people in Seattle, because Seattle is one of the most atheistic places on the planet.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people in Seattle who at least have the freedom to have that point of view.
Yeah.
And it's not wrong that religion can harm people.
Pros and cons kind of thing.
Right. But it really just depends.
Yeah.
And, you could say that marriage harms people.
You could say that atheism harms people.
Right. Everything can harm people.
Could. Downside.
It depends on how one lives and the system one lives in and how one interfaces with that system and the leaders in that system and your peers in the system.
Yeah. I'm an unhappy atheist.
What does that
I'm
mean?
not pleased about it.
Yeah.
It's not like I think this is cool.
Yeah.
I don't think it's cool.
Right.
I just think it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Well, let's take a break. And actually, no.
This was an interesting conversation.
Yeah. I'm going to say the rest of this episode is for patrons only because I want to get even more personal, Bob.
Ooh, juicy.
So if you want to hear the rest of this episode, which will probably be another 45 minutes, you have to become a patron of the podcast by going to patreon.com. That's patreon.com. Become a patron of the podcast where you can listen to the rest of us. We're going to talk further, I'm guessing.
We'll make it worth your while.
Well, what's funny is I wanted to talk with you about 4 different articles and 5 different emails. And we have gotten to the first 2 items on the first article.
Yeah, that sounds like us.
So let's take a break. What do you say, Bob?
Sure.